Thanks, guys. It's fantastic to see such a great crowd here tonight. I'm pretty used to talking to groups of farmers. I do it every few weeks, sometimes continually. What I want to do first, I want to get some hands. Who actually loves gardening? Hands up. Oh, awesome. Must be a couple over there too. A bit hard to see in the light. I love gardening. I have a real passion for the whole focus of soil and plant health. And everything I talk about, pretty much everything I talk about on a daily basis is about helping educate myself and others in regard to how plants and soils operate. And I've been doing this for a long time now, probably 20 years, I guess. And every day, I keep learning more. I learn some from farmers, I learn some from gardeners, I actually teach some sometimes. But my whole passion is about getting that focus on understanding how soils work, because in the past, we've done a really poor job of it. I just trying to work out the technology as well. Just try to understand some of the things that happen around us. In the past, we've actually taken on sciences that weren't quite complete. They weren't. In fact, pretty much no science that we learn is complete, is it? It all keeps getting more. We learn more and more and more each day. Would you agree with that? And there's all these different forms of science. On one side, we've got chemistry, which is awesome, it's great stuff. And we've got biology, and we've got microbiology, and we've got physics, and we've got all these other sciences. And each science is actually focusing on a specific part of the whole. But we've actually got to get a really holistic view about our soils and plants. And I'll explain why too in a few minutes. I have a couple of sons, and I want to make sure, and a very beautiful wife, and I love my life. And I want to make sure that bringing these young people up into the world, it's a bit like Loretta was just talking about, and also Trudy, we've actually got to keep things real and get them to understand how to make our whole ecosystem more successful, how to make it more healthy. And we've done an okay job because we haven't really known the whole story. But more and more now, we're starting to learn the story. And I'll explain the whole system as we go. Who wants to learn some more? Good stuff. Okay, there's a thing called photosynthesis. Who's heard of photosynthesis before? Hands up. Most of you have? Did you learn it at school, or have you learned it since? Since school? Okay, my boys are grade 3, and we've got some friends, and I actually teach some subjects or some courses to year 8s and year 9s, and we're finding that most year 8s are just learning about it now. It's pretty scary, isn't it? 13 years old before they learn about photosynthesis. And I'm going to say some things about photosynthesis tonight that you've probably never heard before. It actually drives everything that happens on Earth. It's the most important process. At the end of the talk, I'm going to ask you a question and you're going to answer it. Everyone's going to get it right. The most important process on Earth is what? Photosynthesis. And the reason why is because it drives our water cycle, it drives the atmosphere in terms of oxygen, so it provides the oxygen we need to actually breathe. It provides the oxygen for every living thing to breathe. It provides all of the energy that goes into our soil. So photosynthesis drives our soil structure and soil health. It drives the atmosphere, and it actually provides all the energy that we need to survive. Can you get that? Is that easy to understand? Or do I need to explain some more? Okay, we'll do some more. Let's have a look at some of the process. When I was a young fella, I came from Dalby down southern Queensland, and Dalby's a farming area. I was a young farmer, grew up on the farm. I went to agricultural college. I learned to be one of the best farmers in the region, and by the time I got to nearly 30, I'd given up farming. And one of the reasons why I did is because I deemed farming wasn't sustainable. Our farming systems just weren't good enough. We were actually going backwards, and you could see it. We destroyed a lot of country in our farming game. And what we actually did was we learnt a lot of bad habits. And when you go to college and you learn all these good things, you don't realise they're not good because that's what you're taught. And that's the experts of the day. So what I learned was that we should have big, powerful tractors, and that we should have specific farming systems, and we should focus on chemicals in the industry, and all the things that didn't matter. But not one subject, not one learning moment did I actually learn about photosynthesis. Instead, that was like a 5-minute session, and everything else was about adding on technology. And you know, you can't do that. to be sustainable, we actually have to build everything on top of photosynthesis. So I'll go a bit further. What I did, we were very successful at what we did, but we were also very bad in some ways. What we've actually seen in the last 30 to 40 years is, you can see that slide, and it shows our carbon levels in our soils. Our carbon is a very, very important driver. That's what photosynthesis drives into the soil, is carbon. Carbon is the storage place, or the humus in the soil is the storage place of carbon, holds all our nutrients in our soil, and that feeds the plants. And if our carbon levels go down in our soil, and you can see in that slide, they've actually gone from around 5% carbon, organic carbon, down to around about 1-2%. So it's a pretty big drop in 30 years. So we've basically mined the carbon in our soils by doing things the wrong way. Would you agree? Yeah. So I'm sure gardeners are doing it. We're doing the same thing in our gardens, the same thing in a lot of our other farming systems as well, including grazing. So back then I didn't realise all this because we weren't being taught that information. This has taken a long time to come through. That's only from 10 years ago, 12 years ago. So it's new science. However, what we've found is that photosynthesis, because it drives the whole energy system in the world, and the definition is really simple. It actually, photo meaning light, and synthesis meaning putting together. So what it's doing is putting together things from light. And the definition is it drives everything on Earth. On land, it's mostly plants and algae that actually photosynthesize. And in the oceans, in the aquatic ecosystems, it's the phytoplankton. So phytoplankton actually produces more than 50% of the world's food. Can you believe that? More than 50% of the food base for this world comes from the oceans. Awesome numbers. So photosynthesis, I'll explain in a bit more detail. It actually produces oxygen. It produces the sugars. Now, do you know how photosynthesis works? I'm the plant, and I'm actually out here growing. And what happens is I actually have chlorophyll in my leaf, and there's a process that happens whereby the light's energy is actually coming down and warming me up, and there's carbon dioxide in the atmosphere being taken in, because you breathe out carbon dioxide, don't you? Yeah? Okay, so you breathe out carbon dioxide, and we have sun's energy coming down, and we have water coming up through our root system. And what happens is there's a stimulation, a chemical reaction which happens and converts sunlight energy into chemical energy, which is sugars. It's carbohydrates. Those carbohydrates then get pumped into the plant and all down through the plant, and the plants are able to make up to 100,000 different compounds from that process, which is absolutely amazing. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah. So in this process, what actually happens is the carbon that actually goes down through the plant into the roots is actually feeding microbes in the soil. Those microbes in the soil are then feeding the plant, and I'll explain how they do that in a few minutes. They feed the plant, and so the plant grows. Now, in that process, we are actually either storing more carbon, or the word is sequestering, it's a new word. We're either sequestering carbon by getting more carbon back down into the soil, or we are losing carbon, which means we're adding to the greenhouse gases, which means we're actually causing climate change. So we can either cause climate change by managing the plant really well, or we can fix climate change by managing the plant, the other way around, really poorly, or we can fix climate change by managing the plant really well and sequestering more carbon. Now, the whole process is just amazing, but I'll bet you, if you ask anyone from home, from your own home, or anyone from even around the region, even a politician, you'll find 99% have never heard of how photosynthesis works in relation to climate change. Can you hear what I mean? Yeah? Okay. So, so there's the process. It's simply 6 carbon dioxide, or CO2, molecules plus 6 water molecules plus sun's energy, and that converts to 6 CHO compounds, which are simply sugar compounds. And those sugars are an energy form that get pumped into the plant. and it gives off oxygen for you and me to breathe, and it gives off a little bit of water. So oxygen for the plant is a byproduct. It's just an excess they don't need, so they give it off. They need carbon dioxide, we need oxygen. So we actually have a symbiotic relationship with every plant. Have you ever heard the term, someone will say to you, my grandma talks to plants and she's a bit weird. You heard that term? But someone else says, but the plants love it because they keep growing. Do you know why they love it? Because she's breathing out carbon dioxide onto the plant and the leaf is taking it in. How simple is something like that? It's like, isn't that like photosynthesis 101? Like, we should all know that, but we don't. So this is the process. Really, really simple. The chlorophyll traps the sunlight energy, and there's an amazing process happens, and there's probably more scientific minds in this room that know more about it than I do. However, what happens is we end up with building the carbon levels in our plant by working it well. Now, the part that's really stimulating, and this is what gets me, I've talked to so many scientists around the world, especially in Australia in the last decade, and some of the top people don't know this because they're not biologists. They're not microbiologists. In fact, a physicist or a physics specialist or a chemist probably doesn't know most of what I'm going to show you. In this process, the plant, which is growing here actively and doing what it has to do, is actually taking in carbon. The sugars that are actually being formed are energy chains of carbon, hydrogen and oxygen, and they're being changed around in different forms. Those carbon chains are actually then being pumped down into the plant, and I said they go into the soil, in some cases into the root. Well, around about half of the carbon chains stay up in the plant, in the what they call the shoots. About half of it goes into the roots, and out of that goes into the roots to grow more root material. Around about 20, well, they've actually measured, scientifically proven, 21% of all the carbon that's produced up here, that's taken in up top, is actually pumped into the soil to actually feed what? Gotcha that time. No, to feed the microbes. It actually goes into the soil to feed microbiology. So that's the little bacteria, the fungi, the protozoa, the nematodes. Probably feeds a few worms while you're down there. But the whole process is about feeding biology in the soil. And what do you think they do in the soil? What happens in the soil then? They bring back the nutrients to the plant. Because the plant's only got a small amount of root area, but the biology in the soil actually bring all the nutrients back. And they all have symbiotic relationships with the plant. I'm going to show you some of those examples. Is this exciting stuff? Oh yeah, riveting. So in the process, there's an area around the roots, around about 1 to 2 millimetres around the root. There's actually a thing called the Rhizosphere. The Rhizosphere is the most action-oriented area of the whole plant, because in that Rhizosphere area, there could be billions of microbes in like a square centimetre. And those microbes are all doing jobs. They're getting fed by the plant. The plant's going down there, pumping its carbon in the soil, and it's going, here guys, take all my carbon and bring me back my nutrients. And the nutrients come back to the plant. That's just how the simple process works. There's a lot more complexity to it than that, but the process is simple. It's all these symbiotic things happening in the soil, meaning you give me that, I give you this. Now, that's in that little root zone. The other thing is, that's only part of the story, because plants need lots of nutrients, and soil is made up of 3 components. It's made up of the biology, it's made up of the physical structure, and it's also made up of the chemistry. And often we have a lot of scientists down here who focus on the chemistry, a lot of scientists up here focusing on the structure and the biology, but guess what? They don't talk to each other. So we have lots of science that's good over there, lots of science great, but if you don't bring it together holistically, then you never know what's really happening. And you can't back up any story that you might put forward. So I've started talking to a lot of scientists to find out what's really happening. And what we're finding, in fact, in the last 5 years, there's been more knowledge increase in terms of what's happening under the soil than probably what there has been for the last 30 years. There's a lot of science in China, there's a lot of science in the States. There's even a lot of science happening in Australia from DAFWA and DAF in Canberra. They're actually looking a lot at how biology impacts on the microbial diversity and how that impacts on nutrients coming to the plant. So this is a really exciting field. And what we find that there's a number of microbes in the soil. There's things like fungi, bacteria, there's protozoa and nematodes, and there's worms, and there's all those other things. I'm just going to go through and just name a couple and just show you what they do. There's actually more microbes in a teaspoon of healthy soil than there is people on this entire earth. So you imagine in your garden, you go and dig up a really healthy patch, and you dig up one garden, and if you actually were able to count those microbes under a microscope, you'd find there's more of them than is on the entire planet. Now, how much potential have we got to harness that energy? Enormous. Oh, I just can't get excited anymore. Every microbe has a role. Let's have a look at some of those roles and see if that might fit. So in bacteria, there are thousands and thousands of species of it. In fact, there's 6.4 million species of animals living on this planet. How many of them do we actually identify and know about yet? 14%. There's 86% unnamed and unknown. All we know is there's a group of microbes in there, we don't know what they are or what they do. So how much potential have we got? Our kids come home all the time talking about outer space. All they want to talk about the last 6 months or so is they've got models made up of the Earth and the Sun and all the planets in the solar system, and they're so excited about it. And I sit down and go, guys, let's talk about photosynthesis. And I go, what, Dad? That's not cool. But let's make it cool, because we've actually got to use some of our knowledge now that we're gaining to make our planet a better place in the future, because by going into another planet, that's not going to save anything, is it? It means we've got to work with what we've got, and what we've got is an amazing Earth that we need to make better. So bacteria have up to 500 million in a teaspoonful, fungi up to 1 million, protozoa there's up to 10,000, nematodes, there's just big numbers. You know, the numbers mean nothing. But in actual fact, there's more than we can actually deal with. So we just go into this garden for a bit. All our soil needs organic matter. It's just a quick look at some of these microbes. The saprophytic fungi, they're actually the white mould that you see on your hay. When you roll your bale of hay over, or you pick your trash up off the ground, that's what you see. That's called saprophytic fungi. And that's the most effective. If you've got that in your garden, just go wahoo, because that's the most efficient degradation system in the world. They will break it down very cheaply, break down your trash. Just a couple of quick photos. Under your hay, that's what it looks like. Under a microscope, it looks a bit like that, just a big mass. Mycorrhizae fungi is probably the most important single microbe in the world. Okay, the single most important microbe. 90% of all plants need mycorrhizae working with them, otherwise they don't thrive. They'll just sit there and survive, but they won't thrive. If you've got mycorrhizae in your soil, your plants will do probably 2 to 3 times better. So find some mycorrhizae, guys, add that to your garden. Rhizobia, there's just some amazing stuff happens. The Rhizobia are basically another microbe that burrows into the root of our legumes and absorbs nitrogen out of the soil and gives it to the plant. That's another one. We've got microbes like, well, that's Rhizobium again. That's actually, if you cut the nodule open, you'll actually find that if it's not pink, it's not working. That's what it looks like on roots. So it looks like you've got a diseased plant, but in actual fact, you've got a very efficient system working. Whoops. Missed that one. So some of the jobs they do, these microbes actually cycle nutrients, they protect the plant from disease, they buffer the soil pH, in other words, they make the area around the root system more able to take in nutrients, and they source nutrients for the plants. Now we did a test about a year ago. We actually looked at what the soil was like right under the roots, and then what the soil was like away from the root system. And you know what we found? That away from the root system, this is only 15 centimetres away from the roots, we found there was only a third of the microbial activity. So the root system and all the carbon being pumped into the soil was actually the reason the soil was healthy. So if we haven't got microbiology in the soil, then we haven't got a healthy plant. So we need, number one, we need a plant with a good root system that's pumping carbon in the soil, and then we also need microbiology around the roots. And there's a really exciting term, exudation. When I learnt this about 7 or 8 years ago, I thought, wow, that's exciting. Because exudation is the process that the plant uses to actually pump the carbon into the soil. So it exudes it in the soil. But if you go back 15, 20 years ago, scientists thought that it wasn't called exudation then, it was actually called leakage. They actually thought that the plant was actually leaking carbon into the soil. So, we've changed our knowledge in such a quick way. So let's just go really through this quickly. What we're actually looking at doing is trying to get more and more people with knowledge about how mycorrhiza works and how our soil structures can be improved and how our photosynthesis can be improved. So who would like to go home tonight, or maybe tomorrow, maybe not tonight, go home tomorrow and actually have a look in their garden and see how their garden is actually working, and then maybe talk to some neighbours and friends about how you can actually make your garden work even more effectively. And now that you know all about climate change and photosynthesis, you've got all the answers. Thank you.